and end of contract decisions. I'm Alex Kozloff, Director of Content at Alsbridge. And before we get started, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping items. First off, we will have the presentation materials and a recording of the discussion available after the session today. And also, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box on your screen during the discussion, and we'll be monitoring questions throughout and responding in the context of the topic. But we'll also try to leave some time at the end, and if there are any questions that we don't address, we'll follow up separately with you offline. So today we're going to look at how the end of contract decision process is evolving and how it's being impacted by a number of factors that include smaller and shorter contracts, by new technologies such as cloud and RPA, and by changing provider landscape. Basically, the bottom line is that the decision process is getting increasingly complex. And we'll also talk about the evolving capabilities of benchmarking and how benchmarking can be used to help guide organizations through some of these complexities. And the discussion today will be led by Howard Davies, an Alsbridge Managing Director who leads our benchmarking practice, and he'll be joined by Andrew Souter, a Director on the benchmarking team. And with that, I'll turn things over to Howard to start the discussion.
Thanks, Alex, and hi, everybody. We have an international session for you with myself, Howard Davies, based in the UK, and running our global benchmarking practice, and my colleague Andy, who is from the USA, and we'll be adding some color and specific details around some of the pricing trends that we see and how they relate to your buying decisions around end of contract. So we'll talk about some general topics as we go through, but as Alex said, you'll have the chance to ask questions as we go using the chat facility on the right-hand side of your screens, and we will endeavor to answer those as we go through the session. So if we can go to the next screen, I'll take you through our agenda. So I'll talk a little bit about Alsbridge and ProBenchmark. Hopefully most of you on the call know about Alsbridge, and hopefully most of you also know about ProBenchmark, but I'll just make sure everyone has the same understanding of the company and that capability. I'll spend a few minutes talking about the end of contract considerations that Alex mentioned, hopefully going into a little bit more depth on some of the questions and some potential answers to those for you to be thinking about. We'll talk a little bit about some of the disruptive technologies. Obviously, the sort of flavor of the year is RPA. This is a big year for automation in general. That itself presents some opportunities with or without outsourcing, to be honest, for companies. But we'll look at the impact that has in terms of the potential to change the pricing structure and the pricing levels. We'll talk a bit about how we're looking at it from a benchmarking point of view, some techniques available to you, either through self-service or benchmarking projects. We'll talk a bit more about that as we go through. And we will give a review of the actual pricing trends. So Andy has been involved in many engagements centered around North America, but global in nature as well. Has a lot of insights into the way contracts are being set up, how contract terms are being managed, and of course the pricing and quality of service that goes with that. So I'm hoping that we'll learn some things from Andy as we go through, and obviously we'll have some data we'll show in terms of prices that will be available to you to review afterwards as well. Next slide. So a little bit about Alsbridge and ProBenchmark. The ProBenchmark team, basically, we provide all of the benchmarking tool and data to support the projects that we're involved in for Alsbridge. And Alsbridge itself, as you may know, really focuses on sourcing advisory, benchmarking, network transformation, and a series of other cost takeout activities that we provide around hardware and software, telecom services. We work closely with clients and providers to make sure that they can set up long-standing, sustainable relationships, and the benchmarking we do really supports that in terms of establishing sustainable market prices that can be durable throughout the term of the contract. And we'll explain a bit more about how that works in practice. But the tool set, the ProBenchmark tool, very widely used. In fact, through the tool, we run with our clients as well about 80,000 scenarios a year, so lots and lots of data running through it. And in terms of benchmarks, we have about 1,500, or in fact more than that, probably over the last couple of years, where we've benchmarked specific contracts spanning all of ITO and BPO services. The tool set we use is a patented tool which has some IP in it that allows us to perform analytics on market prices to understand what those price drivers are. In other words, the characteristics of the services that would influence the pricing. And that's packaged up into the ProBenchmark online tool, which we use for the benchmarking and can also be subscribed to as well. And the data that we collect, not surprisingly, remains confidential. We don't disclose any individual clients or provider data. We simply look at the data we have and then calibrate the ProBenchmark model to reflect how pricing behaves under different conditions. So as volume increases, for example, we can see how the unit price comes down, or if the service levels change, we can see those impacts, and we build that into our model. And so the clients that we have, you can see here, this is just a very small subset. Typically global companies of usually Fortune 1000 status. We typically are involved in work where anyone is spending $1 million a year or more in their contract. Convert that into your currency depending on where you are. And that's really the nature of our business. We're looking at from the relatively small scale contracts right up to $1 billion or more in spend for some of the larger financial companies that we've worked with. Just the bottom point here, we, like I say, cover all kinds of services, the ITO infrastructure services. We look at applications. We also look at network, hardware and software. And we cover the business services around finance and accounting, HR, and other related topics. And as well as the advisory work, we also do provide support for vendor management and governance in terms of actually taking on and managing the contract obligations on behalf of clients for their provider contracts. So we support the procurement and supply management functions in doing that as well. That's a little bit about Alsbridge and ProBenchmark. If we go on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the topic at hand. So when we come to end of contract, and really this is obviously for most people it is a topic that comes up on a regular basis. Should for any contract you have, you just renew yourselves directly with the provider. Should you rebid the work, go through an RFP process and go through that and understand who the potential candidates are, what their offerings can be, how the price and quality differs from one to another. The other option, of course, is to renegotiate directly using data, either your own in-house information or external market data, such as we would provide. And of course, the fourth option there would be to repatriate the services. And we've had, I would say, an increasing, but not increasing that rapidly, a number of companies who've been looking to bring work back in-house, not necessarily fully, but partially, where they believe there may be some savings or some strategic benefits to be gained by running the services internally. But I think generally we still see a high activity in terms of new outsourcing going on. And for those contracts in place, the tendency is typically to renew, trying to get the best from the incumbent provider, or if not, to look externally at other opportunities, other providers that may be able to offer services. So the question, the second one on here, is typically if we keep the same provider or want to renegotiate, should we be looking at the same services or are there changes that could be made in the service portfolio? And that can be driven by the pricing of the services. It could be driven by the relationship with the account team even. It could be driven by the quality of service being provided. the responsiveness to change, a whole series of underlying issues that might drive the need to go through a change of some kind. The renegotiation message there is really, obviously companies have the opportunity to negotiate directly, but the question is often, at what point should the negotiation start and finish? In other words, what is the market comparator to negotiate to in going through that process? So what is a reasonable, fair and sustainable market price that should be expected given the changing opportunities in the market? And that's where we typically are involved to provide benchmark data for a given contract configuration to know, what is the right price to pay for that set of services, whether it's network or data center or whatever. And if that doesn't appear to be possible through the incumbent provider, then clearly there are opportunities, as Alex mentioned at the beginning, to look at alternative solutions, whether that's at alternative providers, whether that's at alternative technologies, or just increasing the level of automation of the existing technology. So looking at the use of autonomics, which is the name typically used for robotic automation as applied to IT, as a means to try to drive out some efficiencies for the existing operations rather than perhaps using another provider to do that. So that's one of the things that is investigated. Of course, there is the potential to change providers, and in those cases, the question is around who might be the suitable providers. We actually tend to look at the difference between the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 providers. We have different classes of provider that we use to help in those discussions. And clearly, there are always costs and risks of transition that have to be considered as part of that process. And we look at, in fact, today we'll talk more about the run rate price trends. That's the kind of day-to-day operational rates, but we also, in fact, we're in the middle of doing one right now. We look at the transition and transformation pricing to help you understand what the likely cost might be if you were to transition the services, how long that might take, what the cost might be of doing that. And then lastly on the list is the in-house option. For those kinds of discussions, it's more around what is the labor portfolio that's required to run those services, and what might the cost benefit be for doing that by using different approaches to either fully insourcing or partially, depending on, again, where there may be opportunities to improve in efficiency. So as you can see, all of these things are really part of the mix of areas that we get involved in, and we will hopefully talk a bit more about these as we go through some of the later slides here. So next slide. We've talked a little bit about RPA here, and autonomics as it applies into the IT market, which is for companies like IPsoft and Arago, providing software to automate IT functions. The same is true in terms of automating the business functions as well. This is very common within things like finance and accounting, where there are highly administrative tasks performed typically with heavy labor involvement. Those tend to be areas of low-hanging fruit for automation to take a hold. And obviously in the IT space, for those labor-driven activities where we are doing things like problem management, problem resolution, and diagnostics, those are candidates for RPA. And we'll show some of the trends we're seeing in terms of forward pricing impact of using autonomics. Also, there are other operating models. Cloud is a common one that used to be a new hype about 2 or 3 years ago. We're seeing large-scale cloud operations now, virtual private cloud and public cloud environments. We're actually right now just, in fact, starting up a public cloud price tracking service to help companies understand how the public cloud providers are modifying and improving their pricing on an almost weekly or daily basis by tracking how those rates change. And that's a common question lots of clients are asking, is how quickly are prices changing? Where could I look to move my traditional private cloud operations to? Are there other ways to provide these kind of services? And the cloud question often can bring about some quite transformational changes in the cost of operations. So that often comes up as a potential area to investigate. And round to the bottom here, in terms of benchmarking, I think benchmarking still comes into play a lot, because one of the things that particularly the ProBenchmark tool helps us do is look at different operating scenarios. So while you may have a traditional server type operation today, one of the nice things we do is to look at what might the cost be for running those same volumes of server images and storage terabytes under a more virtualized operation, as an example, or under a cloud-based solution. Those kind of things are how benchmarking can help in looking at the potential, like a business case for moving some of that technology or those volumes onto a different platform. So I think benchmarking still certainly has a role to play in this kind of scenario analysis.
And Howard, this is Andy. I would add to that the power of our benchmarking tool and capabilities and what we've seen will allow you to kind of look at different scenarios, understand the impact of SLAs, understand how you can potentially improve service or maybe back off service to reduce costs, and we can do a lot of that modeling very easily and very quickly, given the tool set and the experiences that we have through doing, just many benchmarks across different verticals and different markets. The other thing that we often find is kind of a side benefit to the benchmarking practices, as the buyers or the owners of the services can take this data and say, we feel very comfortable that we have the best price for what we have asked for from the market. And that's often a very powerful tool to go back to your internal customers and your business partners and say, we really explored the market, and here's the data to say this is the best possible market pricing that we can achieve, or we should be paying for the services. And that oftentimes helps to quell some of the people in your companies that may be questioning this, or who go out to Amazon and say, well, I can get a server for this, and why am I paying this much? And that's often another benefit of doing the benchmark, and makes it extremely relevant, especially given the total cost of doing the benchmark versus what you're going to spend over the course of a 3 to 5 year engagement with providers.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. I think that's a good point. I think the facts are always helpful here, and the skill of a good benchmark is the mapping of the scope to make sure that the scope is a like-for-like comparison, so you're actually able to draw helpful conclusions from that. So I think that's pretty important. Okay, next slide. So we won't dwell too much on some of these things, but we've talked a bit about already some of the benchmarking capabilities. I think certainly the traditional way of benchmarking has kind of become a bit old-fashioned, a little bit higher cost to do, and certainly some of the approaches they're using have changed that quite significantly, I think. Where the flavor is really now not taking months to do the benchmark, but doing these in a few days or weeks to get to results quickly by just focusing on those key things that influence the price. And also, the providers, they should be involved. I mean, in most cases, the providers have a stake at this. If they're an incumbent, they want to know not just how they compare to the market, but what things could be changed. Are there, to Andy's point, service levels that could be changed or relaxed that would allow the price to be reduced? Could there be other delivery countries used, or other tiers of city within certain countries that could be used to provide some of the labor that would provide an opportunity for the client and the service provider to make cost improvements? I think really the role of benchmarking, it should be a collaborative approach to support the client decision making, but also to offer the provider the opportunities as well to test and see through changes that might actually be of benefit to both parties. And again, as Andy mentioned, I think this forward-looking modeling aspect is equally important, and we obviously have an approach to that, and it's really looking at the effect of the most recent historical data on the future When we talk about future here, we're talking typically in the 2 to 5 year time frame from forward pricing and other technology trends that we're seeing. And in fact, when we go through the pricing trends in a moment, we'll give a kind of a sense of the most recent information we're seeing and our kind of short-term projections on how we think prices are changing in different areas of the technology market. So I think all of this helps to evaluate these new technologies and put facts around them to help to come out with the best decisions. And certainly when it comes to end of contract, like I say, it's not just about negotiating or rebidding on a like-for-like basis. It's really looking at what other options are available to deliver the services and the service levels that are required. Next slide. I'll just leave you before I pass on to Annie to go through some of the pricing trends. So here is a forward price analysis, and in fact the data has moved even since we produced this chart a few months ago. A key focus for automation, of course, is in the labour-based activities in reducing the amount of effort, manual effort involved in this example for level 1, 2, 3 problem handling by using automation. And automation typically can have a far-reaching impact on the IT labour-based activities of easily 50% or more right across the board in terms of the problem resolution and support activities. And the effect of that is by using automation on the bottom right-hand side here, you can see even without automation, the unit price of service typically is going to reduce over time through natural productivity improvement. But the difference with automation is that you will typically have an increased cost, and it's usually literally in the first 3 to 6 months for the software license fees, the process analysis, the tools establishment, and the knowledge transfer. And then we're actually seeing the price effects coming down to below the existing price as soon as 6 months after the start of the program. So we're actually seeing that this second pair of bars that we often find by 6 months, we're actually seeing the with RPA future price actually come down, the unit price, to below the as-is price, and then continuing to reduce by up to 50%, as I said earlier, over a 3-year term. But even these stats are becoming, they've changed in the last few months since we produced this graph. And I think that definitely supports the kind of move to reality now for RPA and automation in general, that there are significant projects being implemented that impact all of IT and business process to varying degrees, depending on the levels of automation that can be achieved. So that's quite a compelling argument, I think, for seriously considering the options available through the automation route. Next slide. Just a background to that. I mentioned the scope earlier. I'll just spend 30 seconds on this just to give you a view on the areas that we cover. As I mentioned before, we do cover all of the infrastructure services, so we'll talk about that as we go through. We'll kind of do a walkthrough of these different towers, as we call them, for cloud, for desktop and service desk, for the traditional data center operations, the network as well. We'll cover applications as we go through this. We'll talk about some telecom, unit price changes. Hardware and software, we actually have offline data around the hardware prices and software prices for particular services and product categories. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, we look at the finance and accounting functions, either from a labor-based pricing point of view or from a transactional price point of view, HR call center, and some industry verticals, but we're kind of starting up in these areas, mainly in financial services, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the scope of the work that we look at. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Howard. As Howard mentioned, I'm Andy Sauter, and I'm responsible for the benchmarking practice in North America, and I've been with Alsbridge for about 5 years now, and involved with just about every benchmark and major project that we have. My background's in kind of the technology, so I'm kind of a technical person at heart, and have moved over to the consulting and benchmarking roles. Really, the trends that we're going to talk through today and are going to be at fairly high level. I certainly welcome any questions anybody has about any of the areas, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have as far as what we see. But so from a market trend standpoint, these are kind of some of the high level trends that we see. From a desktop standpoint, we're seeing increased adoption of virtual desktops. Traditionally, this was kind of a slow move. We're seeing more of it as security becomes more and more of an issue. Costs of servers are going down, virtualization is going down, so it's becoming more of a practical solution, mainstream for production desktops, and we're definitely seeing more of that. Howard touched upon IPA, robotics, automation. There's a lot of different flavors for what it's called. But really, what we're seeing here is it is disruptive from the standpoint of pricing. Companies are beginning to look and understand how they can take automation and look at events and look at things that are going on that typically traditional technologists will have to sit there. They're watching screens. They're waiting for things to happen. They're responding to events. They're scanning the horizon. Things are coming at them. And what companies are doing now is learning to capture what those events are, taking the human aspect out of that, and actually reacting to what is going on. I'll talk a little bit more about that with some of the server piece, but that really is starting to just drive costs down across really all towers that we see. And it's not just the infrastructure towers, we're also seeing it in the BPO market as well. So we'll talk a little more about that. But mainframe, moving to ZOS. Mainframe is an interesting area. Typically, the large companies that embrace mainframe will see the most benefit to moving to the latest platform from IBM. You get more processors, so you can consolidate mainframes, and you can actually, your ISV costs can start to go down as you start to do that, while getting increased, processing power. Cloud, it's just, continues to evolve. There's a level of sophistication that we're seeing as far as now there's increased SLAs, there's aggressive pricing. You used to have a few options, and now it's starting to look a lot more like a full service offering from the standpoint of your server and storage infrastructures, and that's becoming much more attractive to the mainstream buyers. Storage is just going down as far as costs. An increased number of flash users, and the interesting trend there is the costs are going down, but the volumes is going up, so there's a relationship there that you have to kind of watch, and can very easily be out of balance with the market if you're not keeping up with that and constantly watching where the market is going. Application rates, this is an area that's pretty steady as far as the trend that we see. We're seeing some decreasing in pricing, but oftentimes at the result of going to different markets, looking at tier 1, 2 cities. Providers if our clients are more willing to go more offshore or try some different countries, they can see some benefits there. And so that's an area that we're watching and always kind of see what's going on with the rates. Telecom, the move to SIP is going on. We have a lot of virtualization in hardware. Unified communications is becoming more mature from the standpoint of pricing. Probably a couple of years ago, it would be very hard to find some pricing that was consistent, and we're seeing more of that. Network compressions continue to occur, and we're helping lower costs for that piece of it. And really, the BPO FAO market is, when we say it's inefficient, it's really it's from a pricing and maturity standpoint. There's a lot of big clients out there who have lots of BPO, and they're just not quite settling into a trend as far as pricing. the way that resources are being set up. There's still a little bit immature, for lack of a better term. There are obviously bigger providers out there, but they're still emerging and still mixing, and there's still areas that certain companies do better than others. So that's really at a high level where what we're going to talk to. Next slide, please. So this slide really gives you kind of the forecasted price for the services for each one of these. Again, these are our estimates as to where we think things are going, and I would point really to the biggest trend here in the infrastructure space is storage and backup. It's an area that oftentimes within a year or two we see contracts starting to get out of bounds. So that's an area to watch. Again, service desk is one that's on the uptick as more pressure is put on the service desk to handle a wider variety of issues. There's more complex issues coming in. There's expectations that we're not going to transfer tickets out. So a lot of that is actually putting some upward pressure on service desks, and we have a lot of clients coming to us say, what's the best way to do this? Should we do per seat, per incident, per contact? And so we work with our clients to understand what's the best approach for the scenarios that they're in. So, and everything else we feel is there's downward pressure. IPA will help to kind of get that, lower the costs and increase efficiencies across the board. Really, I think for all the towers. So next slide, please. So this slide really talks to over time what happens to your contract and how do we get to the point where we have value that's leaking out of it, or we're not necessarily keeping up with this. It's typically most contracts will have forward pricing reductions, and I will say that depends upon the maturity. Where are you in your life cycle? If you've gone through 2, 3, 4 iterations with a provider, you may see less of that because they feel that maybe there's less to be had, or pricing's gone down so much that they're not really offering that. But typically, if you have your standard price reductions, forward pricing based on assumed efficiencies that will come, a lot of times we'll see the market will decrease for new contracts for that same service. And so what's happening is the actual market price that you could achieve is different than what your actual forward pricing, and that spread over time will grow. And in aggressive areas like SAN and backup and some cases network, that can really cause you to be paying more than you should. And so what we like to say is you should test the market. You should go out and work to see what is the industry doing, what could I achieve, and really look at ways to see where you may be able to optimize your savings and make sure that you're at the right pricing for the market. So because of the way that the market works, it's not uncommon for at the end of the life cycle for a contract to be really high priced. And so we will work with you. We encourage people to do benchmarks not only at the end of contract, but do them throughout the life cycle. Given the amount of spend that you're going to have, the risks to the business, the pressures we're all under, it makes sense, and it's usually a very wise investment for each of you and for your business customers. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to talk into the each of the towers that we support. The way these slides read is we've got the graphics on the right, kind of tells you what the various options that we see at a high level, and then what we think the year-on-year price changes would be for new contracts, and then obviously the verbiage surrounding where we think the trends are going. So that's really the layout of the next next few slides. So again, as we talked about with the desktop, we're seeing more from the standpoint of virtualization. This is an area that we actually, from a trending standpoint, a lot of clients will look and say, do I want to take this back, right? Because it's a customer-facing thing, and if they're not, your customers aren't happy with that provider, they'll look at bringing it back in. You have more control over refresh and what they do. So it's an area that it's not really cited here as a trend, but it's something that a lot of people consider as ripe for coming back in and for us to handle. But again, we also see that a lot of it is outsourced, a lot of using providers, and what's the challenges around desktop right now are, first off, hardware is going down, and so that's an area, if you have a managed contract, that we really want to kind of consider is, am I taking advantage of hardware pricing? Am I taking advantage of the scale that my provider has? How do I make sure that I'm capturing that? BYOD, bring your own devices, is another area that, if you'd asked me a year or two ago, I would have said, yeah, by now we would have some, good pricing on that. It's still a little bit immature right now as far as how providers look at that. What's the formalized contractual agreement for bring your own device? So that's still a little bit immature, but we're seeing more of it in contracts and are able to have some commentary about how to price that and how you support it. And again, when we look at the virtual desktop, with server prices going down, with virtualization, we're seeing more and more of a kind of a lower price in the virtual desktop imaging piece for that area. So that's really kind of where we are right now with the desktop. From the next slide, please. The service desk, again, is one area that we're seeing an increase in pricing. It's interesting, there's still a lot of parity in how the market is working. Again, as I mentioned, some clients prefer per seat, as we see per contact, we see per incident. Pricing can be at the chat, email level, voice level. So it's still an area that's has got a lot of moving parts. It's an area that is going to be, and we're starting to see more process automation, repetitive things that come into the service desk become automated, really looking at ways to eliminate some of the repetitive functions that are going on. There is more pressure on providers to do more at the service desk, so the first call resolution, resolving things, we're seeing more demand being put on providers to handle calls, and that really is an area that is kind of lending itself to increased rates. Your contacts become longer, service levels become more aggressive, and as a result, you have to really have the right people and the right number of people to handle the calls coming in. Again, so the other pressures upon providers really are to reduce the contact volumes, and that's just the nature of service desk, as you're looking to reduce your calls, your handling time, and just trying to make sure that you're really not keeping your key business customers on the line. So again, that's an area that we're seeing is increasing from the standpoint of cost, just because of the nature of the pressures and demands on the service desk today. Next slide, please. Mainframe. So the mainframe is really an interesting market segment. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, everybody was, declaring the death of the mainframe. And the reality is that they're here to stay. We have a lot of clients who embrace the mainframes. They need them. They don't go down. They can handle volumes. We typically see our big clients are going to be in the financial, insurance, governmental, in some cases manufacturing realms, and they really, as much as they want to reduce costs, realize that the mainframe is an integral part of the operations. Small to mid-sized clients are looking typically for ways to get off because it does represent a significant portion of the IT budget. So we're seeing that clients are moving to bigger Unix boxes and can do so as pricing continues to reduce in that space. For those that are embracing it, and they may have multiple mainframe platforms they're using, the consolidation to the latest processors and OS from IBM will give you, the ability to do more with less. Therefore, your software costs go down, your management costs go down, your DR costs start to go down as you start to reduce the number of footprints that you have. And so that's really an area that we're working closely with clients on to say how can you maximize your potential in the mainframe environment, understanding that it's here to stay and that it's necessary. So we really think that the pricing for this is going to continue to go down, and those that are embracing the newer technologies will be able to take advantage of some of the progress that IBM's making in the ZOS space. Next slide, please. So the server market, obviously cloud is continuing to be a topic for everyone. It's interesting because we see, a lot of IT and procurement professionals have to run the gamut with their business customers who, have the ability to go out and look at Amazon and can see what they pay for a server and then ask why is mine so expensive, etc. So it's an interesting set of challenges that the IT departments are facing. This is an area that we expect to see a lot of positive moves with robotics, IPA. And if you think about, typical when you're monitoring a server, you've got your network or your operations center. They're watching, they're getting alerts, they're looking for things that are going on. You got major, minors, and so you've got a high human intervention that gets into this. And when your techs get their alerts, they start to do some analysis. If it's beyond what they're capable of, they're going to start to escalate that, and then Tier 2 will escalate to Tier 3, and then you get vendors, etc. And really what we're seeing happening is good companies will capture those steps and all the things that are going on, and they'll start to take those alerts. They'll actually process the information. They'll look for, if it's this, then we're actually going to automatically escalate to a Tier 3, and we're actually going to alert the vendors, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do the things that normally somebody has to catch, and that's helping to really reduce that kind of level 1 and that human interaction as far as looking at alerts. So it's an area that we really think there's a tremendous amount of gain from an automation standpoint, and as Howard mentioned, the key is you have to be prepared to spend some money up front to see a long-term gain with the automation piece. So, cloud services, again, we're starting to see more just offerings from a service level standpoint, and being able to have the cloud offerings look very much like traditional hard servers that were out in the day, and allow you to stand them up quicker, allows you to grow your development and your test environments much quickly, and then shrink them down as you need to. So that's really that elasticity that we're seeing in growth and flexibility is really impacting pricing, and it presents challenges for clients to figure out how do I get my arms around how to price this. And if you've got arc pricing and all of a sudden you're expanding, contracting, going down, it can really wreak havoc on what you're paying. And so we will work with you to say what is the best approach, what's the virtualization that you should be looking at, where does cloud come into play, given your customer, your regulatory environment, given what you have to do, given what your goals are. And so we really will work closely with you to say, here's a mix that would work. Here are things that we have to, look at from a service desk standpoint. So, next slide, please. Storage and backup. Again, another area where automation can come into play, can be an important part of the mix. Dynamic tiering, moving things from archiving, just a number of things are capable here. Again, event watching where there may be issues. We're seeing storage pricing drop. Flash is becoming much more prevalent, and a lot of progressive contracts will have different tiers, and they'll have service levels on those tiers, and speed and redundancy. And we really look to make sure that when you're renegotiating, that you're putting in forward pricing to reflect the downward trend. It's happening. It's an area that can very quickly become out of competitiveness if you're not watching that. Again, a couple of things we're looking at is just the automated tiering, being able to really recognize what production data is considered absolutely critical and needs to be backed up elsewhere, and speed in which you're going to do that, and the cost associated with that, as well as how to use some of the cheaper storage for archiving and all points in between. So again, we expect this is a trend that's going to continue. It's I once had a client tell me, I expect one day that storage will be free, which is probably not a trend that is actually going to happen, but that was the type of thinking that was going on in that space. So next slide, please. Application labor marks. Again, this is an area that we are very aggressively involved with. Our models allow us to look at various roles. We can look across various countries. If we need to, we can even get to the point where we're looking at regions and countries. And really what we're seeing here is there is pressure to decrease costs in the application rates. A lot of providers are looking to figure out how can we continue this trend, and they do so by either looking to further move stuff offshore if there's an offshore and onshore mix. They're looking to go to different regions within countries, tier 1, tier 2 cities. They're also exploring different markets. And so Eastern Europe, South Africa, areas that are ideal from the standpoint of time zones, languages, etc., are all coming into play. So it's an area that we really we're watching. We have to be very, very keen on, because it's a significant cost for app development and maintenance. We're also seeing more with just bundled services and maintenance agreements, and we certainly can work with you to figure out what the best scenarios are. Foreign exchange is always an area that we will, we're watching what's currency, doing, what are the currency risks. We also look at COLA and figure out what's the best way to contain your costs, what's the way to have a fair and balanced contract. So again, we'll look to see really what the pricing is. So that's really kind of what we see. We also will look at staffing pyramids, and that's an interesting part of our benchmarking that we do. We're not just going to throw a rate structure back to you. We're going to also try to look at, what are you buying, and do you have a lot of a certain type of resources? Are they junior levels? Is that something that's trending with quality issues you have? And we have access to a lot of different staffing pyramids and different things that we can look at to make sure that you're optimized, not just from a rate standpoint, but also from what you're buying. because you can have a great rate, but if you're getting all junior people and your quality is low, or you've got a huge number of people, there may be some better ways to staff. Next slide, please. Network device management. Again, we're seeing more surrounding security, and I would say this really about all towers. Security is a critical part of costs, and we're seeing more and more security contracts come in. Network device management is an area where it's really critical to make sure you've got good firewall management. We're seeing more with virtualization of firewalls, virtualization of other devices and appliances. Bundled pricing and managed services is really the way that most people are buying now. They don't necessarily want to say, I'll buy the router and you manage it, which is kind of a traditional approach we're seeing now. Look, I'm going to pay one price. It's going to give me the hardware. It's going to give me the support. It's going to be IMAX. It's all going to be bundled into this cost, and really allows the IT community to really kind of understand what their costs are going to be and keep them manageable. We're seeing more pricing come out now with unified communications. It's been a little messy over the last few years as far as getting pricing and how that's handled, and that's starting to mature now. We're seeing more with SIP, and kind of again, compression is always going to be an area that's important. How do I maximize my circuit costs and my spend? So, next slide, please. Talk a little bit about telecom. Again, is what we're seeing with overall costs relative to voice and data costs and circuit costs. We have a separate area that does network compression, and we'll look at kind of all of your costs related to this. But as you can see, we really feel this is going down. There are definitely some areas that allow you to take advantage of better pricing, better technologies such as SIP, and really it's an area that we think you should really be looking at kind of year over year. What's my usage? What's my utilization? Where do I have circuits? What's the size of my circuits? All of those things come into play to make sure that you're maximizing your costs and your savings around telecom. So again, and bandwidth is always in demand. How do we optimize the amount of bandwidth that we have for our customers without seeing huge costs? Next slide, please. BPO market. This is an area that's again, we're seeing rates dropping off. Part of that is is currency and the rupee. We're seeing renewals now starting to get into a maturity process and life cycle of contracts for 2, 3 life cycles into the overall engagement. We're seeing pricing decline, but it's not overly aggressive. This is an area that really is ripe for automation. A lot of customized processes that clients will have, legacy processes, just different systems. If you're a company that's bought different areas or you merged and have a lot of acquisitions, oftentimes you'll have disparate systems. And this is an area that we really think that automation will come into play. And again, we think it's a little more inefficient. Pricing just hasn't matured. There's it's just for various functions that are in a company. If you've got banking functions or credit card or mortgage or whatever, there's just the pricing is still not mature yet. But we do have access to a lot of the data in the contract. We've got very sophisticated resources that understand the BPO market and can help you as you start to price and see if your pricing is competitive. Next slide, please. So we're at the conclusions. I kind of talked through those trends fairly briskly. I will welcome any questions that you have as far as each of the areas I talked about. But Howard, I'll pass it over to you from a closing standpoint, conclusion standpoint. But again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, thanks, Danny. In fact, one question I think came up earlier was around the sort of changes in pricing. We talked a bit about the sort of unit pricing in infrastructure and labor rates as well, and applications is one of the areas that we often get asked. Are companies actually in their contract renegotiations looking to move more towards managed services or outcome or transaction-based pricing in the applications area? Is that something you're seeing in the work you're doing, or are people still falling back on labor rate kind of contracts?
I would say that we're seeing much more of a trend towards managed pricing. So clients are asking providers to take over maintenance and support of a portfolio of applications, and what they're looking for is a couple of things. One, it's what's the pricing going to be, and I can see over a 5-year period what I'm going to be paying, and I can keep kind of my focus on other priorities, especially if they're apps that are in runoff mode or or legacy apps. That's an area that we see a lot of maintenance agreements. And honestly, pricing and benchmarking of maintenance agreements is much more tricky because there's not as much transparency to the buyers. You're paying a price, you kind of know who's involved with who's doing what, but you don't necessarily know the numbers and all of that. And so we will come in and we'll take a look at those, and we've got some different ways to look at managed pricing. We can look at the number of people, if you know that, and say, is this ideal? Is the service mix right? If there's other mechanisms such as number of incidents or other triggers that we can look at, will help you understand that. But it is definitely an area that most areas are wanting to pursue, and a lot of it is just cost containment. I want to kind of take this portfolio, I want to give it to somebody, I'll pay you what you have to do, and then we'll move on to the more important critical business functions.
Okay, that's helpful, I think. I think we're just about out of time, so you can see here we've had hopefully some good insights across the different areas that we cover from our research, and I think you can certainly see that benchmarking can play a role there in establishing a price for service, or indeed in looking at other ways to deliver that service and changing quality and so on. So with that, I would like to thank you all for joining, and just pass back to Alex for any closing comments.
Nope, I think we're good to go. Howard and Andy, thanks very much, and thanks everyone for joining. And as I indicated earlier, we will be sending around the presentation materials, so please look for a follow-up. And thanks again.